The pen, um, yeah, the greatest country on earth. It's a label assigned to the United States frequently by politicians, pundits, and average Americans. The most prosperous, the greatest democracy, the mightiest military ever, a singular word, power. And yet here we are proving to be an abysmal failure, both relatively and absolutely, in our national response to the coronavirus pandemic. It's easy to blame 45's ham-handed response, replete with dangerous misinformation and deadly politicization, politicization, whatever. Without a doubt, his actions have cost American lives, but the full price of how we got here precedes this administration. American arrogance was costly long before 45 came to power, but it's what made his own arrogance so dangerous to us all. The person that's doing this all that wrote this article says they recall growing up with a sense of American exceptionalism. They recalled being inspired to join the Foreign Service to serve as a career diplomat representing the country overseas for 8 years before resigning. They believed that our country was a force for good in the world and wanted to be a part of the civilian army carrying that forward. But the illusions of grandeur were steadily eroded. They're saddened by the failures today, but not so surprised as most. Years of seeing America from the outside can drive home just how unexceptional America really is. Through the influence, it's unparalleled. How we use that influence becomes the rub. They saw this firsthand as a diplomat in South Sudan, where they were serving when the Civil War broke out in Sudan in December of 2013. By the time they arrived, South Sudan had been an independent country for only 2 years. The United States had provided the new country unparalleled financial and political support and unwaveringly supported its independence. In the pre-independence period and subsequent years, however, they failed to reassess what we had deemed a success story, turning a blind eye to increasingly authoritarian behavior and bad acts of the government we had long championed. In doing so, we failed to wield our tremendous influence to a good effect. They expressed concern when the nascent nation's army slaughtered civilians as part of a violent counterinsurgency campaign, but we chalked it up to the growing pains of a rebel force in transition. When the then President Salva Kiir sacked his entire cabinet in a brazen move to root out dissent and political competition, U.S. authorities worried quietly, but it did not raise alarm. These actions didn't fit the tidy narrative of a good versus evil that had underpinned our support initially in bringing the new country into being, but we were too stubborn to admit that we played a bad who we believed him to be. Instead of using leverage to press Kiir and his government for change and accountability at a time when such efforts could have made a difference, we chose to stick to our story of success long after that story became fiction. Our arrogance in South Sudan was what we thought if we believed the country was a success it would be. The work of actually making it a success would have been messier, less absolute, and less certain. Our lack of critical self-reflection stymied the utility of our stymied, yeah, stymied, I don't know, stymied? Yeah, whatever. The utility of our actions and the efficacy of our significant investment. A similar pattern has played out repeatedly across our foreign policy repertoire. Our actions and outlook were dominated by short-term thinking, grounded in political expediency rather than principles. This is not a new problem, but one that has lured us time and time again into foreign policy quagmires we could start but not finish. Look at Vietnam and Afghanistan for the most notable examples, but this trend repeats itself on a smaller scale far more frequently. When these projects inevitably fail, we cling to the assumption that we were right anyway. Our actions were just and bad outcomes were merely beyond our control, but because we were unwilling to our mistakes, we were unable to learn from them. However bad that result was, it would have been worse without our intervention, and we tell ourselves it is. I've seen this firsthand too. We have led robust global responses in the fight against the Islamic State and the battle against Ebola, but we are also reluctant participants in group projects we are not empowered to dominate ourselves. We have worked with dozens of countries to promote more representative elections and reduce human trafficking and other crimes. Yet we are equally likely to pursue ineffective projects on untenably short-term timelines, designed to meet our own political ends rather than actual need on the ground. Undergirdling all of this is our belief, as a nation, that America knows best, coupled with the reticence to admit our faults and failures. The real tragedy is that we have had that capability but readily squander it. We are seeing that play out today to a tragic consequence of an exemplary response to the COVID-19 crisis, not only in how we cared for our town and our own, but in the role of an effective global approach, we dropped the ball willfully, and our squatters' unwillingness to admit that impedes us further still. I'm certain that if someone else or anyone else were squatter, our response would have been better. But America's culture of arrogance made 45's actions and inactions possible. This culture is deeply embedded in our political leaders who really prove willing to admit even the most obvious of the missteps. Arrogance has enabled our political checks and balances to a trophy and undermined our bureaucratic ones. Gradually, our executive branch became emboldened and impervious to oversight. Under the administrations of both parties, political allies would deem executive action bold and decisive as long as it aligned with their interest, while arguments for executive constraint were written off as partisan. Arrogance is also woven into the fabric of both our civil service and military structures, neither of which nurture or welcome constructive dissent. The power that culture wields. Consider the standout stories of government officials over. God damn it! Decline, bitch. Consider the standout stories of government officials over the past year. Out of 2 million federal employees, only a handful have taken the brave step of speaking out against this administration while still within its ranks, and most of them waited for a subpoena to do so. Career professionals routinely stand on stage with 45 and have little more recourse than flinching at his lethal lies. They contort mightily in statements and interviews to avoid contradicting their haughty and obese leader. How is it that we find ourselves here, even as the administration's poor decision cost countless American lives? Because the culture in our state hierarchy of bureaucracy rewards good soldiers, not challenging ones. Take it on in faith that their leaders know best and are acting in our collective self-interest. If you disagree, it isn't your job to say so. As someone who pursued dissent through official channels in opposition to our support of the South Sudanese government in 2015, I know this trend predated 45. Though the process of submitting a dissent cable to State Department leadership, I learned that this formal channel was designed to quell dissent rather than to address it. While this is not a problem, it is executed far more indelicately under the 45 administration than it was before. The few public servants who do speak up only underline this point. Just ask Captain Brett Crozier or a host of inspectors generals pushed out of their positions for merely doing their jobs. The 45 administration has repeatedly gotten away with dismissing and retaliating against the loudest, most honest voices. For executive overreach, mostly partisan, but at times nonpartisan too, has provided some foundation for the growing autocratic actions of today. Our redemption will not happen overnight. It will require a cultural shift in our governance. If we are to be an effective leader in the world once more, a change in administration is necessary, but alone it is not sufficient. Our government's oversight mechanisms must be enhanced and respected. Our career civil servants and experts must be empowered to lead. Our discourse over policy, whether foreign or domestic, must be more honest, open, and accountable. Our failures must be admitted and evaluated to inform our future actions. What America lacks as a leader is humility and the ability to admit mistakes and act to address them, which 45 doesn't have any he doesn't have the ability to admit mistakes, and he doesn't have the ability to act on to address them. Our hubris is our country's Achilles heel, perhaps a virus that brings us to our knees and will leave us with this lesson learned. Perhaps we emerge less great by measurable standards, but more capable of achieving greatness again, which we won't have greatness again until 45 is out of office.